Welcome back to the podcast. Today, Rochana and I are going to be discussing an element from the upcoming Flower Essence Society Practitioner Certification Program that we're hosting at the Flower Essence Studies. This element is the 12 Windows of Plant Perception, How to Read the Book of Nature. This way of looking at plants and understanding plants is a core part of the curriculum where you will be able to work through the 12 windows one by one, so that you can understand plants in a way that goes way, way beyond any of the individual windows. When we start to get past the very basic understanding, the two-line description of a plant, and dig into it a little bit more. We work with the level of color, of form, of gesture, of botanical family, my personal favorite, how the plant grows in nature, what are its allies, and where does it grow? Everything from medicinal qualities we look at to the lore. That's another aspect that I really enjoy is learning about the lore of some of these plants because each one of these windows gives you an insight. And a lot of overlapping information starts to help you develop a fully rounded, holistic image of this plant in your mind. And then you'll be able to use the essence more effectively and in true alignment with the gifts of this particular flower. So, welcome, and we are really excited to be presenting this information. We do have some resources that we'll be able to offer. We'll have a link to some basic information on the Flower Essence Society's website about this particular way of looking at it, and then we'll also be able to share you some links on Flower Essence Studies website for a plant study, and in two different types of plant studies done using this approach. Hopefully, this will help get you excited about learning flower essence therapy, and you'll be able to join us perhaps at one of our upcoming courses.
Yeah, and before we dive into that, I just want to give a big shout out to our lovely Bach Flower Foundation students. We recently started that course, and it's been a great experience working with this cohort. We're just having a great time, and want to give a shout out because it's just a joy. And we will definitely be offering that again next year in case you're interested. So at this point, we begin to look at our the next cohort for our practitioner training, as you say, Kathleen, and that is this really in-depth study. And this course itself has a couple different very big sections, as you would, as you would. I think of it as like a three-legged stool. Like it's like one of the legs is all about reading the book of nature as FES defines it and learning these different windows of plant perception. And another big section is about their metaflora framework, which is this archetypal framework of the soul. And the last part is all about working with clients. And so there's a lot to talk about in that last piece. And so today we wanted to share this one piece with you, this the plant perception teachings and exercises that we or share about them, that we teach in the course, and just give you this window into the windows of, so to speak, because it's really, I love this part of working with plants. And it's something that I've always done, way before I learned the FES way of doing it, and their teachings about it. And yet I also kind of stumbled around just teaching myself, learning, kind of figuring it out for myself. So it would have been great to have actually had this earlier on in my path as guidance, because um, it's really there's a lot of depth and breadth to this way of looking at plants. And people those who are herbalists who have done training with about herbalism may have studied the doctrine of signatures or other kinds of plant looking at the plants to see kind of what they're telling us and looking at all the clues and the hints. And this is very similar to that, except it also takes an even, bigger look at um, myth and fairy tales and stories. So it's not just about the plant signature and the plant gesture, but it opens it up even broader to their environment, their families, their relationships with each other, their relationships with humans and other, members of the, animal and mineral and insect kingdoms. And it's just a really great kaleidoscope, basically, that helps us to really like get to know these plant beings on another level.
It's a worthwhile exercise. I really enjoyed doing a plant study, sort of sitting down and doing it more formally on chicory, which is an essence that I have really deepened my relationship with through going through the steps of doing a plant study in the Flower Essence Society style with these 12 windows. I learned a lot. I learned things that I wouldn't have known otherwise. I've been in love with this plant for a long time, and it's one of those that's really tricky from the box system because it has such an unflattering description in the basic, description of it, shortened into the needy mother, which is really quite cruel. And very few people are going to be able to relate to that. And yet, when I did this study, I learned things that I hadn't known about it and deepened my appreciation. Part of the study is to look at the lore and to look at historical uses and relationships with the plants. And when I did so, I discovered some really interesting myths about it. I also found a piece of literature on it. John Updike wrote a poem about chicory, which was really evocative. So, if you don't mind, I'd love to read a few lines of that poem because it really struck the heart of what chicory is about, and I really enjoyed discovering this poem. Show me a piece of land that God forgot, a strip between an unused sidewalk, say, and a bulldozed lot, rich in broken glass. And there, July on, will be chicory. And I have this whole poem, and we'll put a link to this study in the show notes. But the whole poem, it's evocative. That's just one little piece of it, but it really evokes this sense of exile. The chicory pattern, the chicory expression is this plant grows in places that are waste places, in places that have been run over by the wheels of cars, that have been, the sides of railroad tracks that have been compacted. And it can still grow, and it can still be beautiful. And so chicory helps particularly for women. It's kind of this pattern of being repressed and who you are isn't accepted and, being pushed off to the side because you're not fulfilling, the function that others want from you. And yet, chicory teaches us how to dig our roots deeply down into that compacted soil and make space for ourselves, and to be able to bloom from our own beauty and expressing our love for each other and our love for our families without needing to constrict around it. I found it to be such a beautiful learning about this particular plant. And obviously, there's so much more. But that was one way for me to deepen the study that went way beyond reading about, sort of the description of how you would use it in practice.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. And there's so much to these plants. I mean, they really can go as deep as we go with them. The more we work with these plants, it seemingly never ends. Like you never know all there is to know. And, you sit with them and observe them and work with them. And then and you feel like you have a really good, feeling of what that plant is all about. And then sometime later, you might go back and do the same thing. And it's amazing because every time there's new insights. And I just, it, it, it is a lifelong practice. There's no other way around it. And it's a journey that I don't feel like that's even the goal. The goal isn't even, okay, I got to know everything there is to know about this plant. The goal is to meet the plant and go on a journey together, and you don't need to be doing hallucinogenics to do that. So this way, when we sit and we work with plants in the wild and or in our gardens, um, there's a couple, there's the objective looking at the plant and like observing, their shape and their form and their color. And, that's really kind of like what maybe a botanist would do, but we don't have to be botanists to do that. We don't have to necessarily get out a little, um, tape measure and see how, big each petal and stamen is or anything like that. But it's a matter of just kind of opening your observation, your eyes of observation up. And the more you kind of look at it, the more you see. And it's just interesting in that respect alone because, most people these days can exact like know brand, like I don't know what the number is, but like hundreds of brand logos like that, right? We have that in our heads now because just the repetition of, and that's what we see in media and advertising. And so we recognize brand logos, the way that our ancestors used to recognize plants, basically. And so it's relearning that talent inside of us for pattern recognition that is innately there for all of us. It's a matter of kind of refocusing that to nature and the plant world. And it, we really have that innately. And it's just kind of a matter of relearning how to use that, how to look at that. And you start to see, oh, these two plants have the same kind of, shaped leaves or, and you start to be able to recognize patterns and start to see differences that you might not have noticed before. So I love that. And it's almost addictive. And like when I go out for walks, that's all I'm doing is I'm just noticing, I'm looking, I'm observing, and it's beautiful. But then there's another piece to that, and that's becoming a little bit more subjective, right? And experiencing how the plant makes us feel, and we soften our gaze a little bit, and we this is more of the attunement piece where we can feel like what aura and insights and maybe messages might be, what maybe a song pops into our head, or maybe um, you know, uh, some thoughts or some words or stories or memories kind of pop into our head from out of the blue, and those are giving us messages from the plant as well. And then that last piece is all about research and these stories, these myths that come from our culture, that come from the cultures around the world, and like poems like the poem that you found for Chicory. I mean, it's just a little treasure when you start to do research and you find these snippets and realize how they match and map to the observation and experiences that you've already done. I like to save the research to the last so that it doesn't, color my thinking. And it's always full of just these great surprises, um, even with things I might have had done research before about for, studying herbalism or essential oils, but putting it into the context now of the observation and experience with the plant is, um, it's a treat because now maybe see connections I didn't see before. And so that's the practice. That's really what the practice is. And one of the windows, so these 12 windows, and I think this term comes from perhaps a quote from Rudolf Steiner. I don't even remember what it is, so this is a bad paraphrasing, but he did say something to the effect of if you want to know, if you want to really understand something, you have to look at it from 12 different directions or something to that manner. And so that's the idea. That's the idea behind this. And um, each piece of it, is this piece of this kaleidoscope. One of the studies I did this exercise of doing all the 12 windows with both lavender and Queen Anne's lace. And Queen Anne's lace is just a plant that I've always loved. It's the wild carrot, and it's just so interesting how the lens of the windows show with this plant, because one of the windows is called orientation in time, the daily and seasonal cycles. And this is looking at how a plant changes over time. And the Queen Anne's lace, the flower, this beautiful umbrella, lacy umbrella flower, it starts out in this sort of concave cup when it's immature. So it's a rounded, umbrella. And then when it's in full bloom, the umbrella is completely flat. And then it starts to become more of go in the opposite direction to create a cup. And by the time it's ready to seed, the bracts have closed around it and created this bird cage shape. So you've probably seen this because it's a wild roadside plant in many places in the northern hemisphere. And that those bracts that creates this bird cage that they call it is protecting those seeds, and then it'll eventually fall off as like a tumbleweed and roll those seeds to somewhere else to then grow. And so it
I know you have such a sweet relationship with the Queen Anne's lace. It's I love that just as we're talking, we've sort of picked two kind of deep tap-rooted plants, which are interesting. And both of them are these overlooked plants that tolerate a lot of abuse. They're not really delicate forest denizens who can only survive in one particular environment. These are plants that are really adaptable, and sometimes there is a piece with essences of plants that have this ability to endure, urban or farmland situations where they're crushed, or where they're the ground is not loved, let's say, like the edge of the road. And sometimes these plants can be really powerful healers because they have this ability to thrive even when circumstances are very difficult. And I really appreciate what you were bringing in about the observation, because you can learn so much. We do, when you're mentioning the people being able to recognize, logos and symbols very quickly, and we've kind of gotten away from deep looking when we're able to just recognize, or we just see an image and we're like, that's what that is. And then we just keep walking past. We see some, we're driving down the road and we're like, blue flower, whatever, and it's a chicory. We don't have, we tend to go past without slowing down. And something about studying flowers and studying flower essence therapy encourages you to slow down, to ground, to be in this moment. And sitting with the plant and doing the observation process, really, it's amazing how much you can learn because you're really looking and you're really sitting with it. And you're looking at it over time if you can. I've learned so much about chicory from just looking at it every day, walking around, just noticing it every day. The whole piece on chicory about how it blooms. It opens in the morning, and then at the heat of the day, it closes right up. So you can be driving past a field of them, and in the morning you drive past and it's just sky blue everywhere. And then in the afternoon, not a flower to be seen, looks like a kind of a tumbleweedy wasteland. It's extraordinary how much they change and how they respond to the environment. And so chicory teaches us how to sort of tolerate the gaze of the sun, how to draw our resources in and hold them tightly so that we can maintain ourselves, our identity, and then to be able to open up when the circumstances are right. And looking at these plant signatures, looking at the way that they live teaches us a lot about the nuances, about the essences that you don't learn from a quick read or a quick like, oh, yep, it's blue. Okay, yes, it's part of this family, perhaps, which is another important window to look at the differences between plants because we really at the School of Flower Essence Studies, we focus a lot on botanical families because we find that to be a really helpful way of looking at essences, of grouping them in families because the plants in the same family have similar qualities. They're members of the same family. They work in similar ways, and what one can do really well, the next one has a little bit of a more of a specialty. So in the case of chicory, we're looking at an Asteraceae plant. And this family is a huge plant family and one that's very well represented in flower essence therapy. We have the echinacea, we have the sunflower, we have all these different essence plants that are well known, and yet they all share a theme. We might be able to look at that theme and talk about integration and ways of bringing our soul together into a new form of expression. And in Chicory's case, it might be more of how to express your connection to others, how to express your love to others while staying yourself. And I know that in your case, Ro, your love of the Queen Anne's lace is a different family altogether, and might offer some similarities and some real differences from other members of its family.
Yeah, it's the Apiaceae family, which is the family that has, carrot and celery and angelica and also some very dangerous poisonous plants um, like um, poison hemlock and water hemlock and giant hogweed and those kinds of plants. So, what I find is really interesting with this is the flower essence, is about discernment, spiritual discernment, and like using the third eye and um, also I what I like to use it for is for strengthening like the women's intuition and protecting ourselves during our cycles and being able to stand up for ourselves and the unique um experience of being a woman in the world. And but the thing about discernment, this is really interesting because um the where we're talking about using our ability to recognize patterns and and to identify plants, it's very very important with this plant family, this Apiaceae plant family. And because so many people have got Queen Anne's lace, wild carrot mixed up, thinking it's a kind of wild celery or something that's edible. I mean, now it is edible, although it's not going to have the sweet root that the cultivated carrot has. But many people have got poison hemlock mixed up with this, and that has resulted in hospitalizations and death. And if you think about how did people, figure this out, centuries ago, and what kind of what they had to go through to learn to remember, this plant and to be able to recognize it properly. And through all of that history, all of this, there's all this lore around it and these little sayings about it. And you might not know that Queen Anne's lace was named after Queen Anne herself, who, reigned in England, Scotland, and Ireland in like the early 1700s. And and apparently it was called named Queen Anne's lace because it looked she liked to uh perhaps make lace. And there's a one center flower in this beautiful fluorescence of the Queen Anne's lace that's red or dark red. And it's said that that's a drop of her blood when she was making lace. And then also there's um, these other sayings that strike you as odd when you first hear them. Like, why do people make this up? Like the Queen travels in May. Like, so, what, maybe did they in the Middle Age, did they have to like prepare for her trips, around the kingdom? There's also a saying that the queen has hairy legs, and that's actually a plant identification trick to remember that when you're looking at poison hemlock, it's not hairy on the stems, but Queen Anne's lace is. And uh, the queen became a bird watcher in her old age is another saying. And I feel like all of these things were helping people remember how to properly identify the plant. So they put this sort of mythology around it that tied into Queen Anne herself. But really, these are helping people and children know that, how to identify this plant properly and not confuse it with a more toxic relative. So it's a really kind of fascinating when you go into lore like that to kind of think, why did they have these myths? Why did they have this lore? And it it actually, I think, served a purpose that we may overlook today. But if you know that the queen has hairy legs and all these other things, it's going to actually help you identify the plant. And what that brings me back to, though, is that's all a part of our discernment. And this energy of this plant is also about discernment in a little bit of a different way. But to me, it maps.
And I appreciate that sort of we're starting to open up the picture of the Queen Anne's lace, and also this, the sharing specific information about particular plants is something that comes up in many, many cultures all around the world because it's a way of pre-literate cultures or less literate cultures to maintain information without the information drifting. When you have these kind of quirky details or, little sayings like that, it helps the information to stay stable even as it's passed from person to person to person to person. You don't get that, the classic telephone game situation where information starts to wobble and go in different directions. But when you have these really specific, kind of odd little details or a funny little saying like that, it helps for that information to stay accurate over time, without drifting. So it's kind of a fun piece that I learned that from the Chinese herbalist tradition, because for a very long time the literacy rate was very, very low in China because it's very hard to learn to write Chinese. So it was really only the scholars who knew how to write, and so all information was passed orally. And being able to tell the story, to be able to tell a detailed tale about a particular herb, would maintain that knowledge base for generations. And so I think that happens all around the world, so that we can find these funny little stories that seem so odd, and yet we remember them. It keeps us to remember them. I would love for you to talk a little more and share a little more about your experience with Queen Anne's lace as an essence, because I don't know that there's ever times that it's not useful to have good discernment, but certainly it seems appropriate in this moment.
Yeah, well, it was actually the first flower essence I ever made. And it was it so it kind of called out to me. And I guess the rest is history. But because it was the first essence I ever made, I didn't really know what I was doing. And so I I sat with it and made an essence a couple more times over the next year or two after that. And so I really had this opportunity, and it was growing right on the side of my driveway. And, it was like there was a big patch of it that I let grow. And so I really got to see over time all of that, what I was talking about with the way that the shape of the flower head as it was young, as it matured, and really kind of felt what it was telling me. And the other thing is that when you have a patch of them, they're all, kind of on their own timeline. They're not all, at the same stage together. They're all kind of on their own cycle, and in each one having its unique cycle. And there's just a lot of information that sort of came to me from seeing that process. And a big part of it to me was about honoring my cycle, honoring my cycle and listening to my body and cultivating appropriate timing. So those were some messages that I got from my sitting with that plant. And the other part was contemplating about the deep taproot. And so I know you working with chicory, also a plant with a very deep taproot. These both grow in disturbed areas. It is interesting how we both kind of picked those plants. Um, but that deep taproot is, indicative of this strength of really being rooted into the earth. And I made a connection there with how that's actually helping this process of discernment. If you think of the flower is kind of maybe has this affinity with our third eye, with our discernment. Um, it is an airy flower. It's kind of up there. It grows a few feet tall, and it's a very lacy, airy flower. But there's nothing like it's not airy fairy, so to speak, in that it is really connected down into the ground through that taproot. So that can really help us humans in practicing our own discernment when to remember that we are grounded to this earth to that we are embodied, and when we are grounded, our discernment works much better than if we're not grounded. And so that's another kind of message from the plant that I got. And so you can see that it's not just about these sort of intuitive getting a download type messages. While that does happen, it really is connected with reading the book of nature, with being able to um, understand that plant in like in these physical characteristics of the plant, these things that we're seeing and observing, and it's all connected. It's not one or the other that I think gives us the best and the most insight to these plants. And the other piece of that is I also felt such a sense of empowerment, like that, I had a sovereign self and I was empowered to make my own choices. And this feeling of having a beautiful wild divinity. And, it's a wild plant, it's a wild carrot, it's beautiful. It um, is used medicinally. There's herbal lore I won't go into, but there are herbal uses that also help in that arena. And so I just love this plant, and then lastly, the feeling of protection. And that protection is like this mother protecting its babies, because it's like it's got this bird cage that it creates around the fruiting seeds that are starting to the fruits that are starting to become the seeds. And um and kind of looking at that feeling of when it starts to close up, it's starting to protect itself, and it's not doing it out of like weakness, it being vulnerable. It's doing it out of strength, Like, and so if that makes any sense whatsoever, it makes sense to me at the time, but I felt like it's saying that self-care isn't weakness, it's strength, it's self-protection. And it's it's not something to be ashamed of.
I'm just hearing, remember your root. Remember your roots. It's that connection to earth that you can expand, you can have all of these insights, but always maintain your rooting. It's so interesting how the two plants that we've both chosen to talk about are so, this is another one of these windows that you referred to, the window of the four elements, the Western elemental system. And both of our plants are very much air and earth element. And there's that quality both in the chicory and in the Queen Anne's lace of this expansiveness, of this very airy, for me, the chicory, that opening and closing of the flowers each day, it's like the in-breath and the out-breath. It knows when to inhale and when to exhale. It's got that air element, and air passes through without blowing the plants over. They're very resilient. They're able to take it all in, but not be overwhelmed by it because they know when to close. And perhaps the Queen Anne's lace has a little bit of that quality as well of taking in data, taking in information, taking in the environment, and yet maintaining a boundary between self and the overwhelming environment around us. And that taproot, really digging deep down into the earth so that we always have that stability. We always have our roots in the earth. That what word did you use? Like the divine, something divinity. You're that earthly divinity. It's so important to maintain that quality of having our roots in the ground, having our feet on the ground while we do this expansive work. It keeps us from being unbalanced. It keeps us um, really acting in discernment, acting appropriately. And that viewpoint, looking at it through the elements gives us more insights, gives us a way of thinking about it that is very grounded because we are looking at it through that tradition. Is that how you see it?
Yeah, I love that. And another aspect that I didn't mention was the Queen Anne's lace is a biennial, so it doesn't even flower during its first year. And that is also speaking to this kind of a feeling of cultivating appropriate timing and really allowing the root to mature, the root to grow before coming forth and flowering. So I don't know if that also connects, but it is another indicator of honoring the root, of honoring that process.
Well, in that aspect of staying rooted, you're not overstepping your capacity. A plant that has a taproot, they spend the first year, the biennials spend the first year growing the root. The above ground function is to support the growth of the root. And in the second year, they have the strength, they have the resources in order to express in this flowering. So it helps with that character of the prematurity, the eagerness. They're so eager to flower, so eager to express, so eager to do all these things. But if you don't have your roots strong enough, nothing can come of it. You can't do that with any, with the fruit at the end. There's no energy to get to that line of being able to create the seed. The process of flowering, it's all part of this life cycle process. If we try to rush it, nothing comes of it. And I love how that bird cage is formed up, that protective. It's not constraining, but it is protective. It's like that quality of like open-handed holding. It's like you're not gripping. Your hands are open and cupped and allowing the seeds to do their thing, to go out in the world. It has that beautiful quality of sharing what you've learned, sharing what you've picked up on without needing to grip onto it so tightly. That's another aspect where chicory and Queen Anne's lace have some similarities. It's quite beautiful how we've chosen these two plants.
Yeah, and just the interesting, I always find these wild roadside or disturbed area plants so fascinating because they just have so much uh, strength, and they're kind of irreverent. They're just like, I'm gonna grow where I want to grow, and they don't care. I love it. They're so hardy, and you could mow over them and they're just gonna they're just gonna come back. They just have that. I really appreciate the qualities of plants that are like that. They have so much stamina, and I feel like that's really helpful and for us as well. And as you say, they're so overlooked. You can be, on a freeway, and if you just look at in the median strip of gravelly nothingness that's between the two lanes, if you stopped the car or slowed it down, there's so many of these types of plants that grow in these places just against all odds, construction sites and just places that have been ravaged by humans. And they are here. They're still here for us. They're like, I'll do it. They're like volunteering themselves to still be here for Earth and for humans. And so I have so much appreciation for these overlooked plants.
I think we might both relate. I know I've been mowed over and driven over quite a few times, metaphorically speaking. And I think that speaks to a lot of our experiences. A lot of us who are into flower essences, a lot of us who relate to this field have had experiences of being, that are less than ideal. And so these essences can help us to heal from these experiences, to heal from the, less than hostile or less than ideal soils from which we come. So we really encourage you to take a little time with a plant that you might be interested in, that you might know a little bit and want to know more about, and to take a look at your plants through these 12 windows. We have a link to a short brochure from the Flower Essence Society that you can find on our podcast page that will help you start to explore that. And if this approach, one of the modules, one of the pieces of the practitioner certification program that we have coming up this month, I hope that you will feel inclined to check it out some more, possibly to join us. This course is led by our partner, Ruth Toledo Altschuler, who is authorized by the Flower Essence Society to teach this program and has been a teacher of and working with them for decades and really knows this material. She brings so much to this course. It is based on the core information from the Flower Essence Society. And then there's so much more because Ruth is bringing, just these decades of experiences of working with these plants and working as a practitioner that she can just share these insights and help you go deeper into your practice, whether it's you're taking this or working with the plants for your own personal use, or if you're interested in becoming a certified practitioner or working towards that at some point. There is something for everyone in this course. It is so profound and a deep learning process that we have students that keep coming back for it because it's just so rich. There's so much here. We hope that you check it out.
Yeah, and Kathleen and I are also co-teachers of the course, so we're in there and we're with you throughout the live sessions. And we are going to be posting a sample of we're going to put the Queen Anne's lace um, presentation that I did. We're going to make that available to our patrons. Thank you, patrons, for being with us and helping us with this podcast. We really appreciate you. And with that, it's been another great time talking with you, Kathleen, and so happy to um, be coming together every month to talk about the plants, talk about the essences, and connect with all of you who are listening. And we do really appreciate all of you. And yeah, thank you.
And you can find out more about this program. You'll find links to my chicory plant study, and you'll also find a video of Rose's beautiful lavender plant study. It's really a wonderful presentation of all these different insights on lavender. So we haven't talked about lavender, but we have that information available as well. You can also take a gander through the program because you'll be astonished at how much is packed into this incredible program. Ro did a walkthrough of all the different modules and everything that's involved in this course. The live sessions start October 17th. And we hope that you'll check it out. Hope that maybe put it on your plans for this year. And if it doesn't fit into your life this year, perhaps next. Thank you for being with us. Thank you, flower lovers. We are here together, and we welcome you to join us in any of our free offerings we have. If you join our list at Flower Essence Studies, you'll get invitations to our live circles. We do monthly live circles. Ruth offers a beautiful guided attunement journey every month through her Open Circles program. And we have live chats once a month that I coordinate. And we just come out and hang, and we get to talk about plants. And we get to talk about a particular topic. It's a lot of good fun, and hope that you will join us at one upcoming. See you soon.
Bye bye now.